found it interesting in the gospel that it wasn't until Judas left the room that the glory of God shone in Jesus, or Jesus starts talking about it. It's almost like when the bad things leave, the good things can grow. And you sort of see this in the second reading as well, is that if you've been following our readings in Revelation, and if you've read the book of Revelation, which is an interesting book, all the killing, pandemics, all the injuries and everything have stopped, and the city of God is coming down from heaven. Once all the bad is gone, then the city of God can come down from heaven. And as it said, God will be dwelling with the human race. And God is making all things new. What a beautiful vision this could be. This all takes place after the final judgment, and those who are worthy lived on, while those not worthy were thrown into eternal fire. The question we face is, how do we get our names on that list of those who are worthy? And I think that's the partial purpose of the Easter season, is to reflect on where we are and our vision with God and how are we doing. So to understand this, I will look at what is meant by glory, obedience, faith, and love in John's Gospel and in the readings. As we grow close to the end of the Easter season, our readings point us to what we must do to be worthy. To be worthy, we must prepare ourselves to share in the glory Jesus gave to God, as referenced in today's Gospel. Jesus knows his glory will be demonstrated by his crucifixion. God's glory refers to the covenant of peace and justice, which God will establish at the end of time. It is a faith response to God's saving actions. The glory of God refers to the person of Christ. The central experience of this glory is the suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Without his death, there would be no resurrection. Glory refers to the obedient response of faith to God's saving action in history. Obedience to God is responding to a message or word from God. To respond in love and gratitude to the divine initiative. The requirement for obedience is closely associated with faith. Clearly, you must have faith before you can be obedient to it. If you have no faith, you have nothing to be obedient to. That's interesting. The prophet Samuel said, obedience is better than sacrifice. And Samuel is hitting the point that it's one thing to make lots of sacrifices, give money to this, that, and the other thing, or in their case, donate a lamb for a sacrifice. But to be obedient is much harder and requires a lot on our part. And the two things it requires are justice and love are the key factors in being obedient to God's call. Justice requires absolute obedience to God. Human happiness is ultimately impossible without obedience. And the foundation of obedience is in faith and love. Faith, as we read in Hebrews 11:1, is the realization of what is hoped for and evidence of things not seen. Faith is a gift of God which calls us to a personal assent to the truth of God revealed to us through the Scriptures. One of the primary truths revealed to us in today's gospel is to love one another. But what does John mean by love? And as often we've talked about, there are several Greek words for love, and each has more connotations than just the word love. And the word that John is using is agape, which is a spiritual love. This is a compassionate and self-sacrificing form of love. Thomas Aquinas sees love as willing and choosing the good for the other. Love is more interested in the needs of the other than of oneself. Christian love calls us to love all people, even enemies and persons whose behavior may be repulsive. And one of the notes I saw in preparing for this is that the writer pointed out that Jesus loved everybody, even Pontius Pilate. That doesn't mean he liked it, but he loved everybody. As we saw in the story of the Good Samaritan, love extends to include all human beings, regardless of their ethnic, religious, or family background. Jesus' willing sacrifice on the cross was an act of self-sacrificing love. We are called to put our faith in Jesus' teachings and actions and sacrifice what we often want to believe or do. The first reading is almost a triptych of how this is all put together. And remember that towards the beginning of it, it says they suffered many hardships. We have to remember that at the time of Paul and his apostles were traveling, they didn't have highways and buses and trains. They walked most of the places, although there was one time they took a boat trip. But in walking in those days, you were subject to bad weather, you were subject to bandits, you were subject to wild animals. So it wasn't easy going from one town to another town. And yet they persevered in it. Their sacrifice was to give up everything to preach the good news to everyone, even those who didn't want to listen to it. They preached to Jews and Gentiles. They faced resistance, sometimes violent. In fact, in the town of Lystra, Paul was stoned and left for dead. Nevertheless, being obedient to his mission, later he returned to Lystra, and he wasn't stoned the second time. The faith and obedience of the disciples was a message in itself. Their goal was spreading the glory of God through peace and justice. Therefore, if we want to share in the glory of God, we must be obedient to God's commandments for justice for all and to love everyone. Amen.